Hey, deep divers. Ready to tackle some philosophy of science?
Let's do it. We're diving into your class notes and that lecture on the structure of scientific revolutions.
Ooh, yeah, that one. I remember feeling a little lost reading that one. Hopefully we can clear things up for everyone today.
Absolutely. We're going to break down those tricky concepts and give you those aha moments.
You know, those aha moments are the best part of studying. It's like suddenly everything clicks.
Totally. And those are the moments that will help you ace those exams.
Speaking of exams, this deep dive is brought to you by Grade Guru.
That's right. Head over to gradeguru.nl for practice exams, summaries, and more.
It's like having a study buddy who already aced the course. Okay, so let's get started. What exactly is the philosophy of science?
It's about asking those big foundational questions about science. Like how do we know what we know?
Yeah. Or what even counts as scientific knowledge?
Right. Or is science totally objective?
Mm.
Is it? That's what we're here to explore.
Ooh, I love a good mystery. Now, my notes mention something about paradigms. What are those again?
It's like a lens through which scientists view the world. Imagine scientists are detectives at a crime scene.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Their paradigm is the framework they use to examine the evidence.
So, like, do they suspect a thief, a ghost, or a conspiracy theory?
Exactly. That initial framework shapes everything they see and how they interpret it.
So, two scientists could look at the same data and come to totally different conclusions.
It happens all the time, and that's why understanding these philosophies is so important.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this stuff matters.
Yeah.
Now I keep seeing two big words in my notes. Positivism and interpretivism. What's the deal with those?
Those are two major paradigms in the philosophy of science. Positivism is all about objective truth, hard data, and experiments.
So positivism is like, show me the numbers, no opinions allowed.
Pretty much. Think controlled experiments, surveys, stats analysis, anything that aims to be neutral and objective.
Got it. Positivism is all about those hard facts. So then what about interpretivism?
Interpretivism says, hold on, there's more to the world than just numbers. It acknowledges that reality can be subjective.
Subjective, so like shaped by our interpretation.
Exactly. It's about digging into the why behind the what and understanding human experiences.
So if positivism is about measuring things, interpretivism is about making sense of them.
That's a great way to put it. And honestly, most research blends both approaches.
So it's not like one is right and one is wrong. They're just different tools in the toolbox.
Exactly. And speaking of tools, there's this guy named Thomas Kuhn who talks about something called a paradigm shift.
Paradigm shift. Sounds intense.
Kuhn argued that science doesn't progress in a straight line. It's more like a staircase with dramatic jumps.
Ooh, I like that visual. So like scientists are climbing the staircase of knowledge and suddenly, bam, everything changes.
Pretty much. Normal science operates within an accepted paradigm, but then anomalies pop up, things that don't fit the model.
Anomalies. Like weird results that no one can explain.
Exactly. These anomalies cause a crisis in the old paradigm, and that leads to a revolutionary shift in thinking.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you give me an example? A real-world one.
Think about the shift from Newtonian physics to Einstein's theory of relativity.
Ah, Einstein, the guy with the crazy hair.
That's the one. For a long time, Newton's laws explained the world perfectly, but then scientists started observing things at super high speeds and massive scales.
And Newton's laws couldn't quite explain those things.
Right, those were the anomalies. And Einstein's theory of relativity came along to provide a new framework, a new paradigm that could explain those anomalies.
So Einstein basically blew everyone's minds and changed how we understand the universe.
You got it. And here's a key takeaway for you. Even the most established scientific theories can be challenged and overturned.
Wow. So science is always evolving.
Absolutely. There's always something new to discover.
That's actually really exciting. But wait a minute, does this paradigm shift stuff only apply to physics? What about social sciences?
Great question. Social sciences have their own schools of thought within these larger paradigms. Think about sociology, economics, political science.
So it's like different teams within the same sport, each with their own strategies, but playing in the same field.
I like that analogy. And this brings us to another crucial point, the whole debate about objectivity versus subjectivity in science.
Ooh, that's a big one. Can science ever be truly neutral?
It's a question philosophers have been grappling with for centuries, and it's something we'll be unpacking in detail in part 2 of our deep dive.
I can't wait. But first, let's remind our listeners that this deep dive is brought to you by Grade Guru.
Head over to gradeguru.nl for practice exams, summaries, and more. It's like having a study buddy who already aced the course.
Don't miss out. Now let's take a quick break and we'll be back to tackle the objectivity versus subjectivity showdown.
All right, deep divers, back again. Ready to tackle this objectivity versus subjectivity thing? It's a big one.
You know it. I'm ready to get my brain stretched.
Yeah.
But first, remind me, isn't science supposed to be all about being objective? Like finding those cold, hard facts?
Absolutely. The pursuit of objectivity is at the very heart of science. Remember, positivism. Measurable data, controlled experiments, eliminating bias. It's all about creating knowledge that's independent of the observer.
Right. So like two different scientists should get the same results if they conduct the same experiment, no matter what they personally believe, right?
Exactly. That's the ideal, anyway. That's why we have all those rigorous scientific methods. But, and here's where things get interesting, interpretivism comes in and kind of shakes things up. It reminds us that scientists, well, they're human.
Okay, true. Scientists aren't robots. They have their own thoughts and opinions and stuff. So you're saying that might influence their work, even if they're trying hard to be objective.
It's not always intentional bias, but it's more about recognizing that being perfectly neutral is really, really tough. Our brains are wired to look for patterns, make connections, and sometimes those connections might be influenced by what we already believe.
So it's like our own experiences shape how we see the world. Doesn't that make science kind of unreliable if it's all subjective?
Not at all. It just means we have to be extra careful about those potential blind spots. And luckily, science has ways of minimizing bias and making research more trustworthy.
Okay, good. I was getting a little worried there. What are some of those ways? Spill the secrets.
Well, there are things like rigorous methodology, peer review, and replication. By being super clear about their methods, scientists let others examine their work and spot any potential bias.
This is like showing your work in math class. Got to make sure you didn't just fudge the numbers to get the answer you wanted.
Exactly. Transparency is key. And then there's peer review, where other experts in the field check the research before it gets published. It's like having a fresh set of eyes, making sure everything is up to snuff.
Makes sense. Catch those mistakes before they become a big problem. And what about replication?
Replication is all about repeating the experiment, seeing if other researchers get the same results. This helps make sure the findings weren't just a fluke or something unique to the original study.
So it's like double-checking the recipe, making sure the quake comes out delicious every time.
You got it. It's all about building that solid foundation of evidence and making sure individual bias doesn't mess things up.
This is all making so much more sense now. So it's not like positivism and interpretivism are fighting each other. They're more like, I don't know, working together.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They're both valuable tools for figuring things out, and when we use them together, we get a much better picture of what's really going on.
Now, before we go too far, I think it would be helpful to see how all this plays out in real-world research. Something students can relate to.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some examples from different fields, like sociology, economics, and political science.
Perfect. I feel like seeing how these concepts work in practice will really make them stick.
Agreed. So let's start with sociology. Have you heard of rational choice theory?
Rational choice theory. It rings a bell, but I need a refresher. Help me out.
Well, it basically says people make decisions based on a rational calculation of costs and benefits. They're all about maximizing their own self-interest, like tiny economic robots.
Oh, yeah. It's like that classic economic idea of the rational actor, always weighing the pros and cons before making a move. So that fits nicely with positivism, right? All about finding those predictable patterns.
Exactly. But of course, human behavior isn't always so neat and tidy. That's where interpretivism steps in. Interpretivists might say, hold on, people aren't always rational. Their choices are affected by all sorts of things that a purely positivist approach might miss.
So they're taking into account things like cultural norms, power dynamics, or even just emotions, things that influence our decisions even if we're not always consciously aware of them.
Exactly. And you see the same dynamic at play in economics, too.
Really? Economics? I thought economics was all about numbers and data. The ultimate positivist science.
It's true that economics relies heavily on quantitative methods, but even within economics, there are different schools of thought that reflect positivist or interpretivist leanings.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What are some examples of those schools of thought?
Well, take institutional economics, for example. It recognizes that economic behavior isn't just about individual choices happening in isolation. There are institutions, rules, social norms. All of these things shape how markets work.
So it's acknowledging that the invisible hand of the market isn't actually invisible. There are all these forces at play, guiding things along.
You got it. But that doesn't mean institutional economics throws out the positivist toolbox. They still use data, models, and statistical analysis, but they do it within a broader framework that acknowledges the complexity of real-world economies.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. So they're not just crunching numbers, they're trying to understand the stories behind those numbers. What about an example from the interpretivist side of economics?
How about behavioral economics? This field challenges that whole assumption of perfect rationality that drives a lot of traditional economics.
Behavioral economics, I've heard of that. It's like, why do we do things that don't make logical sense? Like buying things we don't need or making impulsive decisions.
Exactly. Behavioral economics looks to psychology to understand how emotions, biases, and those mental shortcuts we use, called heuristics, can lead us astray.
So it's basically saying, hey, we're not always those perfectly rational beings that economic models assume we are. We're messy, we make mistakes, we're human.
Exactly. And understanding those irrational tendencies can actually help us design better economic policies, policies that work with human nature, not against it.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. Yeah. So it's really not about picking a side, positivism or interpretivism. It's about recognizing that both perspectives have something valuable to contribute.
I couldn't have said it better myself. They're both powerful tools for understanding the world, and when we combine those tools, we get a much richer, more complete picture of reality.
This is making me think about all the research I'm reading for my classes.
Yeah.
I'm seeing these paradigms everywhere. It's like I've got this new lens for understanding the world.
That's great to hear. That's one of the most powerful things about studying the philosophy of science. It equips you to think critically about the research you encounter no matter what field you're in.
So, like, I can ask questions like, what paradigm is this research using?
Yeah.
What are the assumptions behind it? What could it be missing? It's pretty empowering.
You got it. That ability to think critically is something you can take with you beyond the classroom. It helps you navigate this crazy world of information, separate fact from fiction, and make informed decisions.
This is all super helpful. I feel so much more prepared to tackle those tricky exam questions now. But, some listeners might want that extra edge.
Of course. That's where Grade Guru comes in. Head over to gradeguru.nl for practice exams, in-depth summaries of all these concepts, and a whole lot more.
Grade Guru is like having a personal tutor, always there to help you ace those exams. Speaking of acing exams, we're not done yet. We still have to tackle political science. Think we're ready for that?
Bring it on! Political science is a wild ride, full of debates and different perspectives. Let's see how those positivist and interpretivist ideas play out in the political arena.
All right, deep divers. Time to tackle political science. This is where things could get really interesting. I have to admit, I'm a little intimidated by political science. It can be pretty complex, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating field, but it's full of debates and different perspectives, which can make it a bit challenging, but that's what makes it so interesting.
True. So how does this whole positivism versus interpretivism thing play out in the world of political science? What kind of examples might we see on an exam?
Well, think about something like voting behavior. A positivist approach might look at all that quantitative data we have, demographics, polling numbers, election results, all that stuff to try to predict how people are going to vote.
So it's like if we know someone's age, income, education level, all that stuff, we can plug it into some fancy model and predict who they'll vote for.
Exactly. And those models can be really powerful, especially when you're dealing with massive amounts of data. But an interpretivist might come along and say, hold on a second, those numbers don't tell the whole story.
Right. There's got to be more to it than just demographics and statistics.
Yeah.
What about all those other factors that influence how people vote?
Exactly. Things like cultural values, personal identities, even those gut feelings we get. An interpretivist might conduct interviews, focus groups, that sort of thing, to try to get a deeper understanding of what's driving people's political choices.
So it's like those positivist models might tell you who people are voting for, but the interpretivist approach can shed light on why they're making those choices.
Exactly. And understanding the why is crucial, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to run a political campaign, design effective policies, you need to understand what's motivating people.
This is all making so much sense. So even in a field like political science, which can seem very data-driven, there's still room for both those positivist and interpretivist approaches.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not about picking a side. It's about recognizing that both perspectives bring something valuable to the table. Just like in other fields, When you combine those lenses, you get a much more complete picture of what's going on.
Wow, I feel like my brain has expanded like 10 times over the course of this deep dive. It's amazing how these concepts can help us understand not just science, but really any field of study.
That's the beauty of the philosophy of science. It gives you these critical thinking skills that you can apply anywhere.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
I've got this new superpower, the power to ask those deeper questions about the research I'm reading and the news I'm consuming. It's pretty awesome.
And that ability to think critically, to question what you're seeing and hearing, that's something you can carry with you throughout your life. It's essential for navigating this world of information overload.
This has been such an incredible learning experience. I feel so much more equipped to tackle those exam questions now. But, for those listeners who are still feeling a little unsure, remember, you've got Grade Guru in your corner.
That's right. Head over to gradeguru.nl for those practice exams, in-depth summaries of all these concepts, and so much more. It's like having your own personal study guide available 24/7.
It's seriously a game changer for students. Well, folks, I think we've officially reached the end of our deep dive into the philosophy of science.
We did it. We explored paradigms, tackled positivism versus interpretivism, and even ventured into the wild world of political science.
And we survived. Big thanks to our expert for guiding us through this complex but fascinating topic.
My pleasure. It's always fun to dive into these big ideas.
And to all our amazing listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey. Remember, keep asking those questions, stay curious, and never stop exploring the world of ideas. Until next time, happy studying.